Today's video is about acceptance, accepting things as they are, accepting situations, the grief, the loss, the trauma, the difficult problems and situations you're going through, and also accepting yourself and where you're at in that. So I'm going to define what that is and what I believe the acceptance means, and that's why I choose this word, and then some of what it's not, as well as some examples, specific examples of how we can accept ourselves in this, mostly ourselves in this situation. And then a few scriptures, I think, that kind of tie in with this, okay? So glad you're with me. This is the second week of me going through my 10 tips that are on my bookmarks, which I showed last week. And the first one is be kind to yourself, be kind and patient to yourself. And these two go hand in hand. They're both foundational tips, principles, or what have you for helping yourself to go along your grief journey and just helping yourself to cope with your grief. Because if you're not doing these two, the last week's and this week's, then you really can't build with the other was on it. As I said last week, self-care is so important, but you're probably not going to be consistent with your self-care or do your self-care in a way that's totally healthy for yourself if you're not being kind and patient with yourself, if you're not accepting things as they are. So here we go. So I first want to give a definition that I found that I believe applies. Actually, there's two. So the first one is for acceptance, that is, the action of consenting to receive or undertake something offered. And then the second one, I think even more so, helps us to understand what I'm talking about. It says willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. Now, what I'm talking about that you're going through, I just use different examples, but all of it falls under a difficult or unpleasant situation, right? They kind of all do. Whether we're talking about a living loss, of divorce, or separation from your kids or grandkids, or the death of a loved one, or trauma, it's all a difficult or unpleasant situation. So willingness to tolerate a difficult or unpleasant situation. Now, I'm not talking about tolerating abuse or what have you. You'll hear me say some things I'm not talking about. And then you'll hear me clarify, because it's very important to get what I'm saying. I don't want you to misunderstand it. And if you still misunderstand it after you watch the whole video, please watch it all the way through. And if you do, please let me know in the comments or reach out to me through Messenger. PM me or something, okay? Because Gary Rowe definitely agrees with this concept. We all can use different words with things, but I like the word acceptance. So, with that, example that I can use that sounds kind of ludicrous or ridiculous, but kind of gets the point across is, say you fall and hurt yourself on your leg and you think it's just a sprain, but you go to the doctor or the ER and they do an x-ray and it comes out that you have a broken bone. If you accept that reality that you have a broken bone in your leg, you will, what? Let them do what they need to, probably cast it, and then stay off of it and or get crutches. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word crutches. Crutches, you'll do what you need to. Why? Because you want to get better and you want that break to heal as quick as possible, probably, right? Because you don't want to be off your feet anymore and you have to. So accepting it would accept the reality of it, and then you would get the help you need with that break in your leg. But if you're not accepting that, then you would maybe say, well, it's okay. I don't really think it's a break, or I don't accept it's a break, or it's no big deal that it's a break. I'm just going to keep walking on it, which means you'll probably endure a lot more pain. But more than that, you will keep it from healing, correct? Which most of us know that if you're walking on a broken leg, you will keep it from healing. So that is the simple story. I just want illustration I want to share. But this applies to our soul, applies to our heart, it applies to our mind. And, we can't see those parts, but they're just as important as our body and our outside. And they need just as much help. And that's what a lot of people understand the importance of mental health are trying to get across, that we need. So there's a lot more awareness that we need to have many people helping with mental health and, the healing of hearts, which the Bible says Jesus is the healer of the broken heart. So God definitely identifies that people have broken hearts. And he's not talking about the physical heart, he's talking about the soul. Although that all affects the physical body. So it's important that we see the need and the urgency of getting help and helping others with their mental health and their soul health, which is not visible to us as it is a leg or a broken leg or something like that, an open cut on our arm, what have you. It's very important, very important, just as important. And if you go through my self-care series, you'll hear me talk more about that, how they each affect each other. So a couple things that you don't want to do when to be clear on what acceptance is, some of the things you don't want to do is fight it. So when we say don't fight it, or I'm not going to fight you, or when we use that wording, it means we're saying accept. Accept here is not about the acceptance stage, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's not about saying that you're going to tolerate everything to stay the same and you're never going to try to get it to change. No, that's not what I'm saying here at all. It's accepting things as they are in the now. But here's a couple things you don't want to do. You don't want to fight your emotions. You don't want to fight the pain in your heart, even though it hurts. You don't want to fight the process that you need to go through to move along your grief journey. You don't want to deny what you're feeling or going through or the facts of what happened. You don't want to ignore those things. You don't want to suppress or stuff them. So if you think of other words, let me know. There's definitely probably other words, but those are some of the ones I thought of. The things you don't want to do. Because if you're accepting things as they are, then you won't do those things. Okay, so that kind of defines it a little more. And if you try to change something, if anything in your life is not what you believe it should be, and you try to change it or do everything you can to change that situation or that mistake, then you're basically not accepting it, right? And that can be very good. A lot of things we need to do that. In this situation, you're not trying to change immediately how you feel or say it's wrong or bad or trying to change the facts of the circumstances, because you can't. The past is the past. That's just the facts, right? So you don't want to necessarily go into trying to change it, what's already done and what already is. And that is all for the purpose of moving along your grief journey and moving forward. So here's a little more clarification. Acceptance of what is now is like accepting the change in your life, because your life has changed, especially a life-changing loss, as I call it. This loss of a significant other, if you want to say that, is huge. If it's changed you and rocked your world and you can't function the same and you're not the same, then you're not the same, and you need to accept that you're different, your situation's different, your life is different, and it will not ever go back to the way it was. That needs to be accepted. Okay? You need to, it's important to accept your limitations and work with them where they are. Accept your new needs that you may have, your questions, your heartache, the stages you're going through. Not having to accept life as usual, that'll be another video. So I may do another video after this to make sure that we're not getting this confused before I go on to my next tip. It's not saying that we're just like, okay, it just is what it is. I'm just going to stay in bed and I'm not going to do anything because it is what it is. We're not saying to stay in that, okay? That's getting stuck. So Gary Rowe says, and he said it on one of the Zooms that I attended last year, acceptance is embracing reality in the moment. Acceptance is embracing reality in the moment. So just a little bit about the acceptance stage, because if you don't know what I'm talking about, most people believe there's at least 5 stages. Some put online, you can see some people where they'll put 7 stages. I learned this in college through a class called Death, Dying, and Bereavement, based off of Kubler-Ross and her book. I'm not referring to that stage right now. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about today. So I just wanted to be clear on that. So there is the denial stage, there is the anger stage, depression, bargaining, and then acceptance. And many people believe acceptance is where we're all always going to be at. In the sense of what the acceptance stage is, in the positive sense of it, that is a goal. But it doesn't mean because you can be in any of these stages at any time, you may not be in any of the stages. Like I never fully experienced the angry stage. Surprising I didn't with the circumstances of how my daughter died, but I didn't. So there's no hard, fast rules to the stages. But if you're not aware of what I'm saying, you can look it up. You can see it still is helpful information, but it's not the whole of what you need to learn when you're working through your grief. Okay, so I just wanted to touch on that to say I'm not targeting that stage right now in our conversation, because you can be in a stage and then move out of it and come back into it. So say you go into the more acceptance stage, and then you move out of it and like go into anger and then go back into acceptance. So that's just, we're all unique. All of our situations are unique. So there's no hard, fast rules is all I'm saying. So here's a few more things you can give yourself permission to do. If you're accepting things as they are, yourself as you are, you will give yourself permission to feel the negative feelings, which aren't fun, as I say, but they're normal most of the time, and we need to know they're normal. So then we are basically giving ourselves permission to feel them, giving ourselves permission to grieve, to make mistakes, to have a day not go perfectly and not to fall apart over it, or just everything doesn't go as planned. It's those kind of things that we're accepting, the negative feelings, so that we can then work through them. If we don't accept the fact that we have a broken leg, we won't get the help we need to mend that broken leg. If we don't accept what we're feeling, what we're going through, the facts of the death, we stay stuck in that point. And it's not abnormal to do that some, but we don't want to stay there. And then what do we do? If I say, I'm very angry, wow, I've just become very angry. I'm very angry at even your loved one that died. Or I'm very angry at somebody else who was a part of that death somehow. Or I'm very angry at myself, what have you. If you don't admit that you're angry and that you're going through, how can you get help with that anger? How can you get help from a counselor, a coach, or a support group, or what have you? Or, how can you get help if you won't admit that that's where you're at? So that's what we're talking about today. Another thing that Gary Rose says is one way to be kind to yourself is to accept yourself. So he's combining those two together. One way to be kind to yourself is to accept yourself where you're at. Instead of reacting in fight, flight, or freeze like we all tend to do under trauma or stress or what have you. So if we're reacting by fighting the situation or fleeing the situation and just getting out of it, not really dealing with it, or freezing and disassociating or something like that, then we're not accepting it. And don't beat yourself up if you go through that, but that's just something that he mentions as an expert on grief that is true, that, it's one way to kind of know that you're not accepting it or able to accept it because you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Okay? So when you're able to accept what you're going through, you can really reduce expectations on yourself, because the fact is you probably can't do things the way you did it before the loss. You can't, you're not functioning as good, you're not thinking as good, you don't have as much energy. All of these things are normal. So the quicker you accept where you're at with that and kind of recognize it, like I just don't have any energy to clean my house, well then let me ask a friend who's offered to help me, let me not be too, stubborn or whatever you want to call it, to ask for help. She wants to help me. I'm going to let her come over and help me clean my house because I have no energy to clean my house. So that's just an example I thought of. Okay, so the quicker you recognize that, the more you can reduce your expectations on yourself and be more realistic about what you can do. Realistic expectations of yourself. Too high expectations of yourself or anybody else is going to add to your grief. It's going to add to your stress. It's going to not help you deal with what you're already going through. It's just going to make another problem. You don't want to do that, right? I don't want to see you do that. So those are a few ways of looking at it that I'm going to share today. And then a couple scriptures I thought of. Romans 15:7 says, accept one another, then just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. So that's talking about us accepting one another as Christ accepted you. Well, I relate that to that includes you accepting you. That includes you accepting you. As Christ accepted you, accept yourself in order to bring praise to God. That's how I see it. You can see it differently. But one thing I can see it. And then there's 1 Peter 4, verses 12 through 13. And it came into my spirit, and so I just wanted to read it. It is partly referring to actual persecution here, but I think it can apply to overall suffering in our lives. So it says, dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. And you can read on if you want to. But that is a verse that came to me, kind of like, don't be surprised about what happened to us. Don't have high expectations for everything to be perfect. That can help us to accept it. And then 1 Peter 5:7 is, cast your cares on the Lord, for he cares for you. Now, I quote this verse many other times, but that came to me as well to show that we're not supposed to ignore our cares or deny them. Or why would Paul say, cast your cares? It's like he's saying, recognize them, see them for what they are, and cast them on the Lord. It's not saying ignore them or stuff them or act like they're not there. So that's just what I felt like the Lord was showing me today. So it really means that to accept things as they are means I'm sorry. Scratch that. All right. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share today. And I hope you got something out of it. If that helped you at all, please let me know in the comments. Please share this video out. I don't claim it to be a perfect teaching, but it's my understanding of one of the things that's very important to move along your grief journey and to work through and not get stuck. Okay, so hope you are blessed. See you next week for another tip off of my bookmark. Bye-bye.